Hello everybody, I am Rachel Leroy from Christian Emotional Recovery, and I wanted to do a video today, a short one, on what's the difference between PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. I actually like the term syndrome better because disorder makes it sound like there's something wrong with you, but we'll use the traditional terms. You get what I'm saying. Post-traumatic stress disorder, what's the difference between that and C-PTSD, which is complex trauma or complex post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder. And I'm going to be looking at a little source here, so bear with me if I kind of look over here a little bit. But first of all, check out my YouTube channel and subscribe. If these videos are helpful for you, tell your friends about them and ask them to subscribe. Check out Patreon if you'd like to support my work and you would like to support other trauma survivors. I put in a lot of time, and so that does take time out of the day that I might be earning money doing a regular job. I also have a regular job, so but anything that you do helps me to help other trauma survivors even more, to be able to do more of that work and to put money back into the podcast and all this platform, because it does take time and it does take money. So that's very helpful and appreciated. And lastly, check out Christian Emotional Recovery podcast and Christian Emotional Recovery Facebook group, all with the same name. Now let's get started. What is the difference between PTSD and C-PTSD? I talk about this briefly in another video as well, and you can check that one out. I think it was the one on recommendations for other YouTube creators that talk about trauma, narcissistic abuse, emotional healing, emotional neglect, and things like that. So there's a little bit about it there as well. But I've got a source here called from Psych Central, and it says, what's the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD? And that's a very good question. Obviously, trauma can significantly impact your life, and usually, basically, the difference between PTSD and CPTSD is that PTSD is when you experience one or maybe a couple of single significant events that cause you to have post-traumatic stress syndrome. And so you might have anger, fear, reactivity. You might be jumpy, you might be in fight or flight all the time, you might have anxiety and stuff like that. Those are some of the symptoms I've experienced. Fear, guilt, things like that, survivor guilt, depending on the situation. It might have been a car wreck, it might have been cancer or a surgery, it might have been losing a sibling, it might have been losing a baby. You know, it's horrific things with PTSD. It's not that PTSD isn't as bad as CPTSD, it's just different. The symptoms are different. But that's PTSD. And CPTSD and PTSD are similar. If you have PTSD, though, that doesn't mean that you have complex PTSD. However, if you have complex PTSD, you automatically have PTSD. Does that make sense? Because CPTSD is a subcategory of PTSD. It's just a different kind, and it's kind of its own too at the same time. But PTSD versus CPTSD, both are related to trauma, according to Psych Central, but they can have different causes and symptoms. They can have different causes and symptoms. PTSD can be from a car crash, an act of sexual violence, for example, a rape, war. For example, the poor people in the Ukraine, what's happening over there, that's going to mess up some people for the rest of their lives. There will be survivors, and people will need a lot of help for a long time from that, unfortunately. Natural disaster, like a hurricane. Here, 3 days ago, we had a tornado 20 minutes from our house. One person was killed, several houses were destroyed. Those people that survive that will have PTSD. Unfortunately. Terrorist event, death of someone close to you, serious injury or illness, or a surgery or something like that. PTSD is common among those who work in high-stress occupations like the armed forces, emergency medics. So that's more classified as PTSD according to the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH. So, events that can cause complex trauma or CPTSD are different. Abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Sound familiar? If you're at this channel, it probably does. I have CPTSD. I don't say that I am something, I say I have it, because it's not me. It's not who I am. Your CPTSD does not define who you are. Who you are in Christ, who you are in God is a totally separate thing. Who you are in yourself is a totally separate thing. These are things that happen to you, not things you did, not who you are. So just remember to, like Joyce Meyer talks about, separate your who from your do, okay? Or your do might be what was happened to you. So, domestic violence or ongoing abuse. For example, someone whose husband or wife continuously physically abuses them. But I would also argue that, I don't think you have to argue it. There's a lot of research that emotional abuse and neglect can also cause CPTSD. Being tortured or kidnapped. And torture does not necessarily mean somebody put bamboo under your fingernails or ripped out your hairs one by one or shocked you with electricity. I'm kind of laughing, but it's really not funny. But it could be that you were systematically tortured emotionally by somebody. And I had that happen to me growing up. I had somebody who picked me, and for whatever reason, I was their target. So I know what it's like to be tortured, and tortured is not always a physical thing. You can be mentally tortured if somebody intentionally gets off on or enjoys watching you suffer. And while there's not a lot of people that do that, unfortunately there are some. But another one, living through a war for a long time. So like with what's going on in the Ukraine right now, it might just be PTSD, but if this goes on, God forbid, for months, years, or even decades, I hope not. I hope they can take out Putin and this can be over and Ukraine can get their country back. Point is that over time, this could cause CPTSD in a good portion of the population there, especially the children and the soldiers, the people that are directly on the front lines too. So God bless those people. PTSD symptoms include intrusion symptoms, avoidance symptoms, arousal and reactivity symptoms, like always being in fight or flight, cognitive and mood symptoms, and then it goes into a little more detail about those, like flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive, frightening thoughts, and so on. And then CPTSD symptoms, I'm not going to go into all the subsets, just give you some of the basics. So what's the difference here? With CPTSD, you may experience some of the same symptoms as PTSD. That's why it's easy to misdiagnose. And that's why if somebody is going to diagnose you, they need to know quite a bit about the symptoms, about the clinical signs, about the causes and the effects in order to accurately diagnose. Because if you treat the wrong one, you're not going to get that right help. If you're being treated just for PTSD, it will help you, but you need to be treated for complex trauma by your therapist and your doctor if that's what you have. So things like hypervigilance or feeling like the whole world is a dangerous, bad place. You may also have distorted negative feelings about yourself. That's common with PTSD too. But with CPTSD, this is different. You may have difficulties managing emotions, like all the time, like anger or intense sadness, not just in specific situations or triggers. Does that make sense? Persistent feelings of emptiness and hopelessness. If you grew up feeling empty and hopeless and lonely and inadequate and you don't know why and you feel like you had a good childhood, you may want to go back and re-examine your childhood and educate yourself. Consider reading a book or listening to an audible called Healing from Hidden Abuse by Shannon Thompson. Changed my life. Healing from Hidden Abuse by Shannon Thompson. Persistent feelings of emptiness and hopelessness, relationship challenges such as trust issues, avoiding others, or participating in unhealthy dynamics. Treatments of both are similar: psychotherapy, medication, or a combo of both. This article, I think, is limited in what it's saying the treatments are. That's why I started this whole channel. I think those are helpful, but there's a lot more, and if you go looking at all these resources I'm putting out, you'll see what a lot of those are. Other teachers like me will also talk about those, both conventional and non-conventional treatments, both mainstream psychological and more experimental type stuff that is newer. But therapy for PTSD, you might hear the wind in the background, bear with me. And looking at this, therapy for PTSD and CPTSD can help you learn more about your trauma, how it affects you. Therapy can also help you develop coping skills for triggers and give you tools to manage your symptoms. One difference between two mental health conditions is that those living with CPTSD may need long-term therapy and support to recover, and there's also an emphasis on forming a strong therapeutic alliance. So Psych Central, having a good relationship, a professional relationship with healthy boundaries with your therapist is a good thing. Having other people that you can go to that are safe is important, especially if you have CPTSD as well. You can have PTSD and CPTSD at the same time. And so you need to get help, you need to get treatment, you need to get therapy. But that's a little bit about the differences of the origins of PTSD and CPTSD and how they may manifest differently and how you may need to treat them differently as a result. Because you can't just treat symptoms, you've got to treat the cause and the symptoms. If you don't treat the cause or the root, you'll just keep going over and over and over, and you'll wonder why you're in therapy for years and you don't get help. Read articles that talk about how somebody, not they're these people trying to sell stuff and they're just making stuff up, but like articles that talk about how somebody actually got healing after not getting it, how a certain therapy was helpful for them when some other one wasn't. You've got to experiment and see what's right for you. You've got to advocate for yourself. You've got to know yourself. And that's why it's so important to educate people. And that's why I have this podcast and this YouTube channel and this whole platform. So that's the difference between PTSD and CPTSD. Please check out my Patreon account. I'll put the link below. If you like what you see here and you'd like to subscribe and you'd like to help me to be able to do more and to help more survivors of trauma and abuse, please consider giving. You can get their start at $5 a month. I'm going to have a store soon. You can support by purchasing things in the store. You get exclusives on Patreon, like early access to the podcast. You get shout outs on the channels. You get other stuff that you can only get on like activities and exercises to help you heal that you can only get on Patreon or at the store. So check those out. I haven't started the store yet, but I will soon. And that's coming soon. And also check out the Christian Emotional Recovery podcast and the Christian Emotional Recovery Facebook group, also linked below. Thank you so much. God bless you. Remember, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Have a great day.